He was just a boy standing alone on the side of a cold highway, rocking, humming, waiting for someone who never came back. Cars sped past without stopping, their taillights fading into the night. Then one trucker hit the brakes. What he found wasn't just a lost child. It was a story of abandonment, whispered in fragments of crayon drawings and broken words. Why was Ethan left there? And why did he cling to a stranger's hand instead of his own mother's? This is the night everything changed, for both of them. Before we continue with this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, as we have a special story that'll be released soon. The highway stretched endlessly under a bruised sky, the last traces of daylight fading into a muted wash of orange and gray. The air carried the brittle chill of late autumn, sharp enough to sting exposed skin and leave a weight in the lungs. Asphalt cracked beneath the force of years and weather, patched in places but never truly repaired. Its jagged seams catching the light from passing cars. Each vehicle sped past without slowing, headlights briefly painting the scene before vanishing, leaving only the roar of engines swallowed by the horizon. At the edge of this road stood a boy, small and slight, his figure barely rising above the weeds that swayed in the restless wind. He kept to the shoulder, his feet planted just beyond the white line that divided survival from disaster. His backpack hung loosely from one shoulder, fabric worn thin, and straps fraying where fingers had tugged at them too often. He swayed gently, not in rhythm with the wind or the traffic, but with an internal beat, a motion that soothed him as the world blurred too fast around him. His breath left him in shallow bursts, visible in the growing cold, rising and dissolving quickly into the dark. The soundscape of the highway was overwhelming. Tires thudding over seams in the pavement, engines straining as they climbed the gradual incline, the whistle of air as trucks barreled past at relentless speed. Each sound struck with a different weight, but he absorbed them all without covering his ears. Instead, he rocked more deeply, his gaze fixed downward at the painted line that glowed faintly under the lights of passing cars. To anyone else, it was just paint peeling against old tar. To him, it was an anchor, something steady, a stripe that remained when everything else blurred into motion. No one noticed him for long. Drivers glanced, their eyes drawn for a moment to the unexpected outline of a child where no child should be. But speed was their ally, distance their shield. By the time recognition sparked, they were already half a mile down the road, and the thought dissolved into the rhythm of their own journey. The boy remained, unmoving except for the slow sway of his body and the restless tapping of his fingers against his thigh. The wind picked up as the last light drained from the sky. It carried with it the dry scent of leaves, crushed and scattered by tires, mingled with the faint tang of oil and exhaust that lingered in the air. His jacket, too thin for the season, flapped loosely around him. The zipper was broken, held together halfway by a safety pin that barely held its place. He did not pull it tighter. His hands stayed at his sides, tapping in quick patterns, his mind chasing the rhythm while his body held its fragile ground against the vastness of the highway. Somewhere far behind him, beyond the curve of the road and the rows of bare trees, a truck's engine growled louder than the rest. It was deeper, steadier, carrying with a vibration that rolled through the asphalt and into the stillness around him. The boy did not turn. His eyes stayed locked on the line, his hum quiet but persistent, matching the only constant thing he trusted in that moment. The headlights swept closer, bright against the dusk, illuminating his small frame for the first time in full. In that fleeting instant, the vast emptiness of the highway narrowed to a single point, a child standing alone at the edge of the world, waiting for something or someone to notice that he was there. The boy's name was Ethan. He was 9 years old, though the way he held himself made him seem smaller, as if the world pressed down on his shoulders with a weight he couldn't quite carry. His frame was wiry, thin arms tucked close to his body as if to protect himself from the cold that crept steadily across the highway. His brown hair stuck out in uneven tufts, cut too short in some places and too long in others, as though no one had taken the time to smooth it down. In his hand, he clutched the strap of a faded backpack, the fabric worn through in patches where it had rubbed against seats, floors, and the ground more often than it should. The zipper was bent, tugged one too many times by impatient fingers, and dangling from it was a single plastic charm, cloudy with age, in the shape of a lightning bolt. He rocked back and forth, his heels rising and falling against the cracked shoulder of the road. Each movement was measured, steady, a rhythm that belonged to him alone. His lips parted slightly as he let out a soft hum, the sound barely audible beneath the rush of passing cars. It wasn't a tune anyone else would recognize, but for him it was enough to calm the churn of noise that filled the air, a thin thread of sound to keep him tethered while everything else raced past too fast. His eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, unblinking, as if by staring long enough he caused something familiar to appear. Every so often he glanced over his shoulder, not at the cars, not at the trees swaying along the edge of the highway, but at the empty stretch of road that curved out of sight. He was waiting. His small fingers tightened around the backpack strap with each look, the knuckles whitening before he let them ease again. He shifted his weight, swaying harder, muttering under his breath words too soft and tangled to follow. They slipped in between the hum, half thoughts and half prayers, spoken as if repeating them might make someone return. But no one came. The highway was endless motion, cars flashing by in streaks of light, but none of them slowed. Not a single pair of headlights paused long enough to see him clearly. Each vehicle carried people with their own destinations, their own reasons to keep moving. They passed, and Ethan remained, one small figure swallowed by the immensity of the road. His humming grew louder as the sky deepened, as the sun sank lower and the shadows stretched long. The weight of absence pressed against him, heavier than the backpack on his shoulders, heavier than the cold. His shoes were scuffed, soles nearly worn through, the laces tied in knots that had been pulled tight days ago and never undone. He scraped them lightly against the asphalt in restless motion, his voice rising in short bursts of sound, almost like birdsong. He tilted his head back once, scanning the endless lane of headlights, then dropped his gaze again, whispering, "Wait, wait, wait," as though the word itself could summon what he needed. The world didn't answer. The wind carried his words away. He hugged the backpack closer, pulling it tight against his chest now, as if it were more than just fabric and frayed straps, as if inside it held the last traces of comfort he could cling to. His eyes, dark and wide, began to shine in the headlights of the next passing truck, but he didn't raise his hand or call out. He stayed rooted to his spot, swaying, humming, waiting for someone who should come back a long time ago but never did. The first car passed so quickly that Ethan hardly registered it. Just a surge of white light across his face and the roar of tires. A gust of wind that tugged at his too-thin jacket. Then another came, and another, each one flashing by like a streak of brightness across the darkening road. He didn't lift his arm. He didn't try to wave. He simply rocked, the same rhythm as always, watching the lights come and go. Each vehicle carried warmth and voices he would never hear, doors that opened for someone else, never for him. The taillights glowed red as they faded, sinking into the curve of the horizon until they were swallowed by the night. He watched them shrink, his gaze fixed on the vanishing dots until his eyes stung. Then the sound came next, always the sound. Engines roaring, wheels grinding against the road, vibrations that shook the ground beneath his shoes. The noise came first, grew louder, peaked as the vehicle swept by, then faded into nothing. Again and again, the same cycle, until it felt like time itself was measured by the rise and fall of that sound. No clock ticked for him here. No calendar hung on a wall. The highway's rhythm was the only thing marking the minutes, the hours. Ethan's hum tried to compete with it, a soft and fragile sound against the steel and thunder of the traffic. He leaned into it, rocking harder, letting the vibrations in his chest match the vibrations of the road. His eyes never followed the cars for long. They were too fast, too bright, leaving him with afterimages that hurt. Instead, he focused on the white line, cracked and faded but steady, something that didn't disappear. He tapped it once with the toe of his shoe, then drew his foot back, afraid to step too close. The line was safety. Beyond it, the world roared too loudly, moved too quickly. The night deepened and the temperature dropped. His breath rose in small clouds, visible only when headlights swept across him. No driver slowed down enough to notice. They might have glimpsed him, just a flicker of a child silhouette at the edge of the road. But the image disappeared before it had time to settle. By the time recognition stirred, the car was already gone, the driver already telling themselves they must have imagined it. The highway didn't belong to children. It belonged to speed and distance, and Ethan was neither. He hugged his backpack tighter, pressing it into his chest, his fingers digging into the straps until they bit into his skin. Inside were his treasures, though they wouldn't mean much to anyone else. Half-used crayons, a notebook filled with scribbles, a water bottle, a folded scrap of paper. They were pieces of familiarity in a place that felt like it could swallow him whole. Each time the taillights faded, he squeezed the backpack harder, as if the fading light was a reminder that he was the only one left here. Minutes blurred into what felt like hours. The stream of cars never stopped, yet the space around him remained empty. The wind clawed at his hair, at his jacket, and still he rocked, still he hummed. The glow of passing lights would come again, always fleeting, always gone. The world moved on without him, and he stayed in place, measuring time not in seconds or minutes, but in the relentless sound of engines rushing past, never slowing, never seeing him at all. The growl of a diesel engine carried down the highway long before the truck came into view, a steady thunder that rose above the hum of smaller cars. Its headlights cut a swath through the dusk, twin beams piercing the dim air and throwing long shadows across the asphalt. The vehicle was massive, its chrome grille catching what little light remained, its trailer humming with the weight of cargo that had miles yet to travel. For most drivers, it was just another semi on the road, but for Ethan, standing alone on the shoulder, it was a force unlike the others, slower, heavier, impossible to ignore. Inside the cab, Jack Morrison kept both hands steady on the wheel. His knuckles were calloused from years of work, his shoulders broad but slouched in a way that spoke of too many long hours behind the glass. The faint crackle of country radio filled the cab, a familiar voice crooning about loss and home, though Jack hardly heard it. He was used to background noise, something to fill the silence, but never fully occupy his mind. His eyes stayed trained on the road, scanning in the careful way that long-haul drivers learned over years of keeping themselves and everyone else alive. He had seen enough near misses, enough things darting out from the shoulder, to never let his guard drift. It was that vigilance that caught it, the flicker of movement on the edge of his headlights. At first, he thought it was just wind pulling at weeds along the roadside, or maybe an animal startled by the noise. He leaned forward slightly, his grip tightening. The radio crooned on, but his attention sharpened, eyes narrowing against the glare of oncoming headlights. The shape was too still, too upright. Not brush, not deer. His heart gave a sharp beat as the realization struck. It was a child. Jack blinked hard, as if his mind was trying to argue against what his eyes were showing him. But the silhouette remained. Small frame, thin arms, the faint outline of a backpack slung over one shoulder. The boy didn't move as the truck approached, didn't wave or step forward, just stood rocking gently at the edge of the line that separated asphalt from gravel. Jack's chest tightened with a jolt of something close to panic. He eased off the accelerator, the heavy truck rumbling as it began to slow. Hazard lights clicked on, casting their rhythmic orange glow into the dark. His eyes stayed fixed on the boy, half afraid that if he looked away for even a second, the child might vanish or step into the path of another car. He guided the truck carefully toward the shoulder, tires crunching over loose gravel, the massive vehicle sighing as it came to a stop. Jack cut the radio and sat still for a moment, listening to the ticking of the engine cooling against the cold night air. His pulse drummed in his ears, louder than the sound of the idling motor. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, rough with stubble, trying to make sense of what he had just seen. A boy, alone, on a highway where no child should be. He thought of all the reasons it might be a mistake. Maybe the kid's family car was just around the bend. Maybe help was already coming. But when he glanced out again, the sight didn't change. The boy was still there, swaying, clutching that backpack like it was the only thing anchoring him in the world. Jack reached for the door handle, hesitated, then pushed it open. The cold rushed in, cutting through his flannel shirt, sharp and biting after the warmth of the cab. He stepped down onto the gravel, boots crunching as he landed, the reflective strips on his jacket catching the truck's own light. For a moment, he just stood there, one man against the weight of the night, watching a boy who seemed carved from stillness. The highway roared on around them, but Jack's focus narrowed to the small figure at the edge of the road. He felt the instinct rise in him, steady, undeniable. The same instinct that had carried him through years of watching out for strangers from behind a wheel. Something was wrong here, deeply wrong, and he knew in his bones that walking back to his cab and driving away was no longer an option. The rig's brakes sighed as Jack eased his foot down, the long body of the truck responding with a groan that carried over the steady rumble of its engine. Orange hazard lights began to pulse against the dark, painting the cracked asphalt and the scrub along the roadside in flashes of warning. Cars behind him swerved slightly, impatient drivers accelerating to pass, horns blaring briefly, as though his sudden stop was an inconvenience rather than a question of life. Jack kept his grip steady on the wheel, eyes never leaving the figure that hovered at the shoulder of the highway. In all his years of driving, he had seen plenty of strange things at the roadside. Families huddled beside overheated cars, teenagers pushing rusted sedans, drifters waving cardboard signs, even the occasional desperate animal darting across lanes. But never once had he seen a child standing alone in the cold, unmoving, as traffic screamed past. The boy's presence didn't belong here. It was as if someone had placed him in the wrong scene, a puzzle piece forced into a picture that didn't fit. Jack eased the rig onto the gravel, the crunch beneath his tires loud in the night. The trailer shifted with its weight, a low creak passing through the frame as it settled. He flicked off the radio, the silence inside the cab suddenly thick and expectant. The boy remained where he was, thin arms hanging at his sides, the faint strap of a backpack visible even from a distance. He didn't look up at the truck, didn't move at all except for the slow, rocking sway of his body, as if he found his own rhythm to keep him steady against the chaos of the world around him. Jack's chest tightened. He thought of his own son, now grown and far away, but once small enough to fit in the crook of his arm, once fragile in ways only a father could understand. The memory sharpened his focus, cut through the fatigue of miles already driven and the hours still ahead. He shoved the gear shift into neutral, pulled the brake, and sat there for a moment staring out the windshield at the boy and the flashing glow of his hazards. The highway carried on as if nothing had changed. Cars flew by, some slowing slightly to glance at the scene, others ignoring it entirely. Each pair of headlights illuminated the boy for only a second, then left him in darkness again, as though the world was giving Jack just enough proof that what he was seeing was real. Jack rubbed a hand across his jaw, rough with stubble, and drew a slow breath. He had a choice, though in truth it didn't feel like one. He could call someone, wait in the warmth of his cab, and tell himself he had done enough. Or he could step out, put his boots on the ground, and face whatever truth was waiting in the eyes of that child. His door handle was cold under his palm. The hinges creaked as he pushed it open, and the night rushed in bitter and sharp. Gravel shifted under his weight as he climbed down, the reflective tape on his jacket catching the glare of his own lights. The air smelled faintly of diesel and damp leaves, the sense of highways everywhere, but now layered with something heavier, the unmistakable awareness that he was stepping into a moment that could not be undone. Jack shut the door behind him, the sound loud against the endless whine of traffic. He adjusted his cap, squinted through the glare of passing cars, and focused on the small figure no one else had stopped to see. The boy didn't flinch at the sound of the truck, didn't move as Jack approached, boots crunching with each step. He just rocked gently, humming to himself, as if the highway's roar had nothing to do with him at all. Jack slowed his pace, every instinct urging him to be careful, to tread lightly. He had pulled over for a stranded driver, but what he had found was something far stranger and far more fragile than anything he had ever encountered on the road. Jack's boots met the gravel with a crunch that sounded far too loud against the endless hum of the highway. The orange hazard lights from his truck pulsed behind him, throwing fleeting shadows that stretched and shrank across the roadside weeds. He adjusted the brim of his cap and started forward, each step slow, deliberate. He had seen plenty of people stranded before, grown men swearing at flat tires, families standing helplessly beside overheated engines. But this was nothing like that. The figure ahead was too small, too fragile, and the sight of him standing alone against the roar of traffic pressed something heavy into Jack's chest. The boy didn't turn as Jack approached. He stood at the shoulder, rocking back and forth, the movement steady as a pendulum. His arms hung stiff at his sides, but his fingers tapped an urgent pattern against his thighs, rapid, almost frantic. The The rhythm reminded Jack of a drummer, keeping time only he could hear. The boy's gaze never rose from the ground. It stayed fixed on the painted white line that ran along the edge of the road, as if the line itself was the only thing tethering him to the earth. Jack stopped a few feet away, careful not to crowd him. "Hey there, buddy," he said, his voice low and steady, the same tone he had once used to coax a frightened colt out of pen or to calm his own son after a nightmare. "You all right?" The boy gave no sign he had heard. His rocking continued. His tapping grew quicker, and the hum at the back of his throat filled the space between them. It wasn't a song, not really. Just a sound, soft, unbroken, and constant, layered over the relentless noise of the highway. Jack rubbed a hand across his jaw. He had no script for this. No training manual in all his years on the road had covered what to do when you found a child standing alone on an interstate at night. He crouched slightly, lowering himself so he wasn't towering above. The gravel dug into his knees, but he stayed still, his hands resting loosely on his thighs. "I'm Jack," he said, speaking slowly, carefully, as though each word had weight. "I drive that big truck there. You see it?" Still no response. The boy's eyes didn't flicker toward the rig, didn't acknowledge the pulsing lights that made the night glow. Jack studied him more closely now. The wiry frame beneath the jacket far too thin for the cold, the hair falling untidily over his forehead, the way his lips pressed together between bursts of hums. He was 9, maybe 10, but carried himself like someone much younger, lost inside a world of noise and rhythm that didn't belong to anyone else. Jack's throat tightened. Something in the boy's silence wasn't just fear. It was a wall, a barrier built from whatever had led him here. He shifted his weight, careful not to startle him, and tried again. "You hungry? Thirsty?" He tapped his pocket, where a wrapped granola bar from a truck stop still sat from earlier in the day. The boy's fingers froze for half a second, but his gaze never lifted. The rhythm resumed almost immediately, faster this time, as if his body was reminding him of the pattern that kept him steady. The sound of a car horn cut across the night as a sedan flew by, its driver leaning too close to the shoulder. The gust of wind pushed Jack's jacket back, and dust kicked into the air. The boy flinched, not at Jack's presence, but at the sound. His shoulders jerked, and his hum rose sharply, a defense against the intrusion. Jack raised a hand quickly, palm open, though he wasn't sure whether he was trying to calm the boy or shield him from the world rushing past. "You're safe," Jack said firmly, though his own heart was pounding. He let the words hang there, steady as stone, hoping some part of them might reach through the rhythm the boy was trapped inside. For a moment, the humming softened. Not silence, but less frantic. The boy's fingers slowed against his thighs, and his rocking steadied to a gentler sway. Still, he didn't look up. Jack stayed crouched, the cold seeping into his bones, but he didn't move. He knew enough to recognize that trust wasn't something to be forced. It had to be earned in silence, in patience, in showing he wouldn't disappear if the first attempt failed. The hazard lights blinked behind him. The trucks and cars screamed past, and Jack waited. The boy's lips parted, as if a word might emerge, but none came. Only the hum remained. Jack leaned back slightly, exhaling into the night. He hadn't gotten through yet, but he wasn't walking away. Jack lowered himself further until he was balanced on the balls of his feet, arms resting loosely on his knees. His breath came in steady clouds, faint puffs that drifted into the cold night before disappearing. He kept his voice low, gentle, the way you might speak to a spooked horse or a child waking from a nightmare. "It's all right, son. You're safe. Nobody's gonna hurt you." The words slipped into the dark, but they hung unanswered, swallowed by the constant roar of the highway. The boy didn't lift his head. His eyes stayed locked on the white line that glowed faintly beneath the truck's beams. He rocked forward, then back, forward again, his body moving with a rhythm so precise it seemed as if he were keeping time with something only he could hear. His fingers tapped against his thighs, quick bursts of movement that matched the silent count of his rocking. Jack noticed the boy's lips moving too, just barely, forming words or sounds so quiet they were inaudible over the engines tearing down the road. Jack's knees ached, the gravel biting into his skin, but he didn't move. Any sudden motion, any hint of impatience, might push the boy further behind whatever wall he had built to protect himself. So he stayed still, the hum of the idling truck at his back, the pulse of the hazard lights flashing orange across his boots. The boy seemed carved into the roadside, fragile and unmoving except for the rhythm he clung to. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only language between them was silence, broken by the mechanical thunder of cars and trucks hurtling past. Jack watched the boy's face, pale under the harsh beams, and saw the strain around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. It was the look of someone holding on to the only thing they could control, even as the world threatened to tear it away. Jack tried again, softer this time. "My name's Jack. What's yours?" He let the question linger, giving space for an answer. None came. The boy rocked again, heel to toe to heel, gaze fixed downward. Jack waited, let the silence settle again. The urge to press for a response tugged at him, but he knew better. Some kids needed space more than words. He shifted his weight slightly, careful not to break the fragile stillness. He wanted to reach out, place a hand on the boy's shoulder, but the thought passed quickly. Something told him touch would be too much, too soon. So he leaned back just enough to take the edge off the closeness, but not so far that it looked like retreat. In the silence, Jack's own thoughts filled the gaps. He thought of his son, when he was small, how he used to line up toy trucks in perfect rows on the living room rug, how he hated sudden noises, and how a stranger's voice could send him running for cover behind the couch. Jack had understood then, not fully, but he had learned patience. He had learned to wait for his boy to come out when he was ready, instead of pulling him out before he could handle it. That memory steadied him now, reminded him that the best thing he could offer this child was time and presence. So Jack sat in the cold air, knees aching, lungs filling with the sharp bite of diesel and autumn wind, and said nothing more. The silence between them was not empty. It was its own fragile thread. Every passing second, without pressure, was a message in itself. "I won't rush you. I'm not leaving. I'll be here when you're ready." The boy rocked, his fingers tapping faster for a moment, then slower. His gaze never left the white line at his feet. But he hadn't walked away, hadn't bolted into the dark. For Jack, that was enough. For now. Jack's eyes drifted from the boy's downturned face to the backpack, slung loosely across one thin shoulder. In the glare of the truck's beams, he could see how worn it was, the fabric dull from years of use. Seams pulled apart with a weight had strained against weak stitching. Across the front, a faded pattern of superheroes stretched, once bold in color but now ghost-like. The kind of characters a child might cling to when the world around him felt too big and uncertain. The zipper hung crooked, bent from being tugged one too many times, and the pull tab was missing entirely, replaced by a loop of string tied with clumsy knots. Jack tilted his head slightly, crouching lower to bring himself closer to eye level with the boy. "You got a strong pack there," he said gently, more to open the door than because he expected an answer. The boy didn't respond, didn't even blink, but his hand twitched once against his thigh, the tapping momentarily faltering before resuming its steady rhythm. Jack took it as a sign that the words had landed, even if the boy chose not to show it. The wind carried the scent of diesel and cold earth, biting through Jack's jacket as he shifted his weight on the gravel. Slowly, carefully, he eased a hand toward the strap of the backpack. He didn't grab at it. He just pointed. "Can I see what you got in there?" His voice was patient, steady, no louder than it needed to be. For a moment, Jack thought the boy might turn away, close himself off entirely. But instead, with slow movements that seemed rehearsed, the boy slid the strap from his shoulder and let the bag rest at his feet. Jack reached for it cautiously, giving the boy every chance to stop him. When no protest came, he lifted the backpack into his lap and gently pulled at the zipper. It stuck once, twice, before giving way with a rasp. Inside, the first thing he saw was a water bottle, half empty, the plastic dented and scratched from being dropped. Next to it, crayons tumbled loose, some broken in half, their wrappers peeled away until only stubby wax remained. They were scattered among the seams, rolling against the corners as though they'd been carried everywhere and used anywhere a surface presented itself. At the very bottom, folded several times until the edges were frayed, was a single piece of paper. Jack eased it out, careful not to tear it further. He unfolded the creases slowly, the sound crisp in the night air. Across the sheet, numbers had been scrawled in uneven lines, written and rewritten, as though someone had pressed hard into the page with urgency. They weren't equations or sums, just sequences, random to Jack's eye, but with patterns that felt deliberate. 7s and 2s repeated often, mixed with circles drawn around certain groups and arrows pointing to nowhere. Jack frowned, turning the page slightly under the light. The boy's humming changed when the paper was revealed. His rocking slowed, and his eyes, which had stayed fixed on the pavement for so long, flicked upward just briefly, enough for Jack to catch the glimmer of recognition. Then they darted back down again, the rhythm resuming. But Jack had seen it, that fleeting spark. Whatever the numbers meant, they mattered to the boy. Jack folded the paper back carefully and slid it into the backpack. He didn't speak about it. Not yet. Some things needed the right moment, and forcing meaning too soon could close the door he was trying to keep open. Instead, he adjusted the zipper, setting the bag gently beside the boy again, close enough that the strap brushed his shoe. The boy's hand shifted, fingers brushing the fabric, claiming it back without a word. Jack sat back on his heels, the silence stretching between them again. But this time it wasn't quite the same. The backpack, the paper, the broken crayons, they were signs. Signs that this boy wasn't just lost on a highway. He was carrying pieces of a story too complicated for words. And Jack knew, with a certainty that tightened in his chest, that he was meant to help find out what it was. Jack leaned back toward the truck, the weight of the night pressing heavier on his shoulders now. He kept one eye on the boy, who still rocked in place with that same steady rhythm, fingers flicking against his thighs as if each tap was the only thing keeping him tethered. Jack reached into the cab and pulled the worn CB handset from its cradle. The black cord curled like a snake, the plastic casing warm from a hum of the rig. He held in his hand for a long moment before pressing the button, his thumb lingering, the silence stretching out. The highway was no place for hesitation, though. He brought the mic up close and cleared his throat. Breaker 19. This is Morrison, eastbound on I-89, mile marker 254. Got a situation on the shoulder, juvenile, male, maybe 9 or 10 unattended, requesting highway patrol. Over. His voice came out steadier than he expected. Firm but calm, the way he always sounded when he had to call in a breakdown or report a wreck. Only this wasn't a wreck. This was a child standing alone in the dark, and the weight of that made the words hang heavier than any load he'd hauled. The static hissed for a second before a voice came back, clipped and professional. Copy that, Morrison. Patrol units in the area, ETA 10 minutes. Can you stay on scene? Jack's gaze slid back to the boy. Ethan hadn't moved much, hadn't acknowledged the sound of the radio at all. His focus was still locked on the white line glowing faintly under the truck's beams, his lips shaping the hum that filled the silence between engine roars. Jack pressed the mic again. Yeah, I'll stay put. Hazard lights are on, rigs pulled off clean. Kid looks quiet, but unharmed. Over. He clipped the radio back into place, but didn't step away from the cab just yet. His eyes kept drifting to the boy, scanning the details the way a man did when trying to piece together a puzzle that didn't make sense. No shoes scuffed from running. No sign of bruises or injury. Just a boy in a jacket too thin for the cold with a backpack that looked like it had seen more years than it should. Jack rubbed the back of his neck. He'd seen kids on the road before, but always with families, always with someone watching over them. This wasn't that. This was different. He thought about just waiting, letting professionals handle it. But something about the way the boy rocked, the way he clung to that pattern, the way his eyes refused to leave the pavement, gnawed at him. This wasn't simply a matter of a kid who wandered too far from home. Jack had been around enough to know when something didn't add up, and nothing about this added up. The minutes stretched as the hazard lights clicked rhythmically behind him. Jack crouched again, letting the gravel dig into his boots, careful not to push closer than the boy could handle. Help's coming, kiddo, he said softly. We'll get this sorted out. The boy didn't respond, but the humming shifted slightly, as if the tone had been in response to the sound of Jack's voice. It wasn't much, but it was something. Jack straightened, scanning the road for the flash of patrol lights. 10 minutes wasn't long in most circumstances, but out here, with a child swaying silently at the edge of danger. Every passing car stretched time thin. He kept glancing back at the boy, feeling it settle into his bones. This was more than a roadside pickup, more than just another stop on a long road. Something had put this boy here, and Jack knew that when the officers arrived, he wasn't going to just walk away. The steady hum that had been spilling from Ethan's lips wavered, thinning out until it broke into silence. Jack, crouched a few feet away, felt the shift like a small change in the air, the kind that made a man straighten his back without knowing why. He kept his eyes on the boy, waiting, careful not to push. The rhythm of tapping fingers slowed. Ethan's lips moved, opening just enough for a sound to slip free, softer than the passing wind. Jack leaned forward, straining his ears. He thought at first it was just another fragment of that hum, but there was shape to it, the faint outline of a word. It was swallowed up by the roar of a car engine, the headlights flashing across them before fading again. Jack's brow furrowed. "Say that again, buddy." His voice carried no demand, only patience. The boy's mouth moved once more. This time the sound reached Jack, carried between the bursts of traffic noise. A single syllable, fragile and trembling, but unmistakable. "Mom." Jack's chest tightened, the words sinking into him with a weight he hadn't expected. It was not a cry, not even a call, just a whisper so faint it seemed as though the boy was afraid the night itself might take it from him. He repeated it again, the same soft tone. "Mom." His eyes still fixed on the white line at his feet, his rocking beginning again as if the word had unsettled him enough that he needed the rhythm to anchor himself. Jack exhaled slowly, his breath clouding in the beams of his headlights. He swallowed against the lump rising in his throat. That one word told him more than anything else had. The boy hadn't asked for help, hadn't tried to explain where he was or what had happened. He had clung to the only anchor his world gave him, a mother. Somewhere behind that small, fragile word was a story, one that Jack suspected was far darker than the boy could say. He shifted on his heels, lowering his voice even more. "Your mom. You're looking for her, huh?" The boy didn't nod, didn't glance up, but the rhythm of his rocking grew sharper, as if the sound of the word being spoken aloud had stirred something he couldn't control. His hands clenched at his thighs, tapping harder, the hum creeping back as though he needed both sound and movement to hold himself together. Jack rubbed the back of his neck, eyes drifting to the backpack beside the boy. The folded paper with numbers flashed through his mind, the broken crayons, the dented water bottle. Pieces of a life carried in fragments, each one pointing back to a child who should have been at home, asleep in his bed, not standing on a highway whispering for someone who wasn't there. Traffic roared past again, a pair of trucks rattling the ground beneath them. Jack's jaw tightened as he watched Ethan brace against the sound, his small shoulders hunching. "Mom," he whispered once more, softer now, as if the word itself had been worn thin by repetition. It was the only word he had, the only one he trusted enough to give. Jack let the silence stretch, fighting back the urge to fill it with promises he couldn't yet keep. Instead, he steadied his tone, low and firm, as reliable as the rumble of his idling truck. "We'll find her," he said. He didn't know yet how, didn't know what truth lay behind that single word, but he spoke it anyway, because he could see in the boy's eyes, even if they never left the pavement, that the whisper wasn't just a name. It was a plea. The hazard lights kept blinking behind them, the orange glow washing over their figures, marking them against the night. Ethan rocked, whispered again, and Jack realized that, for now, this one fragile word was the boy's entire world, and it was his job to listen. The word lingered in Jack's ears long after Ethan had gone quiet again. "Mom." Just a whisper, fragile enough to be lost in the air, but strong enough to stir something deep in him. Jack found himself staring at the boy, the thin frame rocking in rhythm, the pale face still turned downward, and for a moment the highway faded away. What rose in its place were memories, clear as headlights in the dark. He saw his own boy, years younger, perched on the edge of a narrow bed in a trailer they once called home. The boy's hair had stuck up in unruly tufts after sleep, his pajamas too short at the wrists, but his eyes had been wide, shining with questions he couldn't always put into words. Jack remembered crouching just as he was now, trying to bridge the space between a child's silence and an adult's uncertainty. His son had been different from other kids. Quieter, cautious, careful about who he let into his little world. But Wade did let you in. When he finally raised his head and met your eyes, it felt like a gift you didn't dare mishandle. Jack swallowed against the ache in his throat. That boy was grown now, out carving a life of his own, miles away from highway shoulders and the noise of truck stops. Yet the memory of him, small, vulnerable, and dependent, pressed hard against Jack's chest. Seeing Ethan standing here in the cold, whispering for a mother who wasn't coming, collapsed the years in an instant. It reminded him too clearly of how fragile a child's world could be, how easily it could tilt into something no one should have to bear alone. He rubbed a hand across his jaw, feeling the grit of stubble beneath his fingers. He had called Highway Patrol. They were on their way. 10 minutes, maybe less by now. That should have been enough. His duty as a passerby was done. But Jack knew himself too well. He couldn't just stand here, waiting for flashing lights to take the boy away. Something in his gut told him this wasn't just about finding a child lost on the road. There was a story stitched into that silence, one that needed more than routine paperwork and reports. Ethan's tapping grew quicker, the hum breaking out again, thin and shaky. Jack shifted on his heels, speaking softly, though he wasn't sure the boy could hear over his own rhythm. "I had a son about your age once," he said. Couldn't sit still either. Had to keep his hands moving, tapping on the table, drumming on the dashboard. Drove his mama crazy. The memory pulled a brief, quiet laugh from his throat, though it carried more weight than humor. The boy didn't respond, but Jack hadn't expected him to. The words were as much for himself as they were for Ethan. Speaking them out loud solidified the connection in his mind, the undeniable pull between what he'd lived before and what he was standing in now. He thought of the nights he had driven long hauls and called home, hearing his son's small voice on the other end of the line, clinging to the comfort of knowing his father was still there, still watching over him even from miles away. Jack's gaze drifted back to the white line the boy stared at, glowing faintly in the truck's lights. He understood the fixation. Sometimes a man or a child needed something steady to cling to, a straight line cutting to the dark when everything else felt like chaos. He let the silence linger, not pushing, not pressing, only offering presence. The growl of another semi thundered past, shaking the ground under them, and Jack's eyes hardened with resolve. This wasn't about leaving things to others anymore. The patrol would come. But he was already in this, bound by the memory of a son who once needed the same kind of patience, the same steady voice. Jack knew, with a clarity as sharp as the cold night air, that he couldn't step back now. Whatever had placed this boy on the side of a highway, it wasn't going to be solved by simply handing him over and driving off. He had been a father once, and standing here now, he felt the weight of that role return, not in name, but in instinct. The boy whispered for his mother, but for this moment, Jack was the one who had heard him, and that meant something. The night was settling deeper across the highway, and with it came a sharpness in the air that cut straight through fabric and skin. The wind had changed, no longer just moving along the roadside, but slicing down from the open sky with the kind of chill that carried the promise of frost. Jack felt it bite his hands first, creeping into his knuckles, stiffening the joints. Then it pressed against his cheeks, raw and unrelenting. He glanced at the boy and saw the cold making its claim there too. Ethan's thin jacket puffed weakly against the gusts, its broken zipper offering no protection. His small body rocked as it had before, but now the rhythm was interrupted by shivers he couldn't control. His lips, already pale, trembled between hums. Jack's heart tightened at the sight. A child had been in bed, under warm covers, not standing exposed on the shoulder of a highway where the world roared past without care. He rose from his crouch, joints stiff from the cold ground, and crossed back toward the cab of his truck. Each step was accompanied by the crunch of gravel, the hazards pulsing their steady warning behind him. He tugged open the side door and leaned in, rummaging through the space behind his seat, where he kept a small stash of necessities. His fingers brushed against rough fabric before finding what he was after, a folded blanket, heavy and warm, its edges worn but reliable. He pulled it free and stepped back into the night. The cold struck him harder after the brief shelter of the cab, but he ignored it, turning back toward the boy. Ethan hadn't moved except to hug himself tighter, his thin arms crossing in an attempt to trap what little warmth he had left. Jack slowed his pace, careful, not wanting to startle him. He held the blanket out in front of him, letting the boy see it, the fabric swaying faintly in the wind. "Here, buddy," Jack said softly. "Just a little something to keep you warm." He stopped just short of him and bent slightly, lowering the blanket as if offering a gift. Ethan's eyes flickered once toward the movement, the first acknowledgement Jack had seen in minutes. But then they dropped again, back to the white line, back to the glow beneath the headlights. Jack waited, giving him the choice, the time to accept or reject. The boy didn't reach for it, didn't move at all except for the shivering that rattled through him. So Jack shifted again slowly, carefully draping the blanket over the boy's shoulders. He didn't wrap it tight or pull it close, just let the weight of it settle there, heavy enough to shield him, light enough not to smother. Ethan flinched at the first touch, his rocking stuttering, the hum breaking into silence. Jack froze, his hands hovering, not pressing the moment. After a beat, the boy adjusted, fingers clutching the edges of the fabric almost instinctively, drawing it close to his chest. The shivering eased, not gone, but dulled by the layer of warmth. Jack straightened, the breath he'd been holding escaping into the cold. "There you go," he murmured, voice nearly carried away by the wind. The boy's hum returned, softer this time, as if the rhythm had changed, not so much frantic as steady again. Jack watched him carefully, relief spreading across his chest in quiet waves. Small victories, he thought. Sometimes that's all you could ask for. The cold wind whipped at Jack's own jacket, seeping through the seams, but he ignored it. He kept his focus on the boy wrapped in the blanket, standing there under the harsh light of the truck beams, swaying against the noise of the world. It wasn't comfort, not fully, but it was a step toward it. And for now, that was enough. The distant wail reached them before the lights did. At first it was faint, a rising note threading to the constant drone of the highway, but as the minutes narrowed, the sound grew sharper, insistent, cutting through night like a blade. Jack heard it and straightened, glancing down the dark stretch of asphalt until a glow of red and blue strobed faintly on the horizon. Relief should have come with that sight. Help was arriving, official and certain. Yet the moment the sirens carried close enough to touch the air around them, Jack saw the change in the boy. Ethan's humming, steady in its fragile rhythm, broke suddenly into something louder, desperate. His hand shot up to his ears, pressing hard against the sides of his head, his elbows tucked tight against his body, as though he could block out the world closing in on him. The rocking, always present, grew faster, sharper, as though his small frame was trying to shake loose from sound. His lips moved rapidly, his voice spilling a louder hum that rose almost into a cry, unbroken but trembling. Jack's stomach tightened. What to him was a signal of safety was to the boy a storm bearing down. The pulsing lights flickered brighter now, sweeping across the trees, the pavement, and then over Ethan's small figure, flooding him in a kaleidoscope of red and blue that turned the night into chaos. The boy squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head against it, the hum rising until it was all Jack could hear above the sirens and the roar of passing cars. "Easy, son," Jack murmured, crouching low again, his hands raised but careful not to touch. "It's okay. They're just here to help. You're safe." But the boy wasn't hearing him, not in the way he needed to. The noise was too much, the lights too sharp, filling every corner of his senses until nothing else could break through. Jack stood quickly and turned toward the approaching patrol cars, throwing an arm into the air, palm out in a sharp gesture. The vehicles slowed, their tires screeching faintly as they rolled up behind his rig, the sirens still blaring. Jack stepped forward, motioning hard with his other hand. "Kill it!" he shouted over the noise, his voice carrying the edge of command. "Lights, sirens, cut it now." For a moment the officers hesitated, as if unsure whether to comply. But the urgency in Jack's stance, the pointed jabs of his hand, made them act. One by one, the sirens cut out, the shrill wail dropping into silence that seemed to echo louder than the noise itself. The flashing lights dimmed next, the red and blue glow replaced by the steady beam of headlights. The sudden calm fell heavy over the scene, broken only by the hum of Jack's idling truck and the quick, uneven sound of Ethan's breathing. The boy's rocking slowed gradually, the tightness in his movements easing just enough for him to lower his arms. His hands still hovered near his ears, but the pressure lessened. The hum softened, shifting back into the rhythm Jack had heard before, fragile but steady. Jack exhaled in relief, glancing back at the officers as they stepped cautiously out of their vehicles. "Easy," Jack warned them, his voice steady but firm. "Don't rush him. Don't crowd him. He's already scared out his skin." The patrolmen exchanged glances but followed his lead, approaching slowly, their boots crunching softly against the gravel. Jack turned back to Ethan, crouching once more. "See? Quieter now, just like before. Nothing's gonna hurt you." He kept his voice calm, each word drawn out like a rope thrown across a gap. Ethan clutched the blanket tighter around his shoulders, his gaze fixed downward again, but the wild rocking had eased, and that was enough. Jack stayed close, a steady presence in the chaos that had almost swallowed the boy whole. He knew then, more than ever, that this wasn't just about handing him over. It was about guarding him through every step, especially the ones that looked like help but felt like danger. The moment the patrolmen stepped closer, their hands resting on the heavy flashlights at their belts, Jack felt the shift. Their eyes moved from the boy to him, weighing the scene as if the explanation might not be as simple as it looked. The taller of the two, a lean man with sharp features and tight jaw, tilted his head slightly, narrowing his gaze. "Sir, what's going on here?" His tone wasn't hostile, but it carried the edge of suspicion, the kind that came from too many nights dealing with situations that didn't add up. Jack straightened slowly, dusting the gravel from his palms, his shoulders squaring out of instinct. "Name's Jack Morrison," he said evenly. "I'm a driver, long haul. Pulled over when I spotted him standing out here alone." He gestured toward Ethan, who remained wrapped in the blanket, rocking faintly, his eyes fixed low. Kid was just standing there at the shoulder, no car, no adult. Couldn't leave him. The second officer, younger and broader, gave a small nod but kept his expression guarded. "You called it in?" Jack jerked his chin toward his rig. "Used to CB. Figured someone had to come out here before he got himself hurt." But the taller one wasn't finished. His eyes flicked from the boy to the truck, then back to Jack. "And you didn't think to wait in your vehicle? Why'd you get out? Why is he wrapped up in your blanket?" Jack felt his jaw tighten, though he forced his voice to remain calm. "Because he's freezing," he answered, his tone carrying a firmness that brooked no argument. "And because leaving a 9-year-old standing on the side of the interstate in the cold didn't sit right with me. That enough of a reason for you?" The younger officer shifted his weight, maybe hearing the sincerity in Jack's voice, but the taller one still seemed unconvinced. He crouched slightly, lowering himself toward the boy. "Hey, buddy, can you tell me your name? You with this man." His words were sharp, not unkind, but too direct, too sudden. Ethan recoiled at the movement, his rocking growing sharper, his hands tightening around the blanket. His lips parted, a hum spilling out, but no words came. The officer leaned in closer, repeating the question, and that was when it happened. Ethan's small hand reached out, fingers clutching at the hem of Jack's jacket. The touch was light, tentative, but unmistakable. Jack looked down, startled by the contact. The boy had clung to nothing, and no one since Jack had stopped had kept himself closed off in silence and rhythm. But now, under the weight of official voices and probing questions, he had reached for Jack, as though anchoring himself to the only presence he trusted. Jack lowered his eyes toward him, softening his tone. "Easy, son. It's all right. You just hang on." The officers noticed the gesture too, and the taller one straightened slowly, his suspicion faltering. Jack could see the shift in his eyes, the recognition that whatever had placed the boy here, the trucker in front of them wasn't a threat. Still, the question came, though softer now. "You sure you don't know him?" Jack shook his head firmly. "Never seen him before tonight. I just stopped because it was the right thing to do. That's all." For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the distant rush of cars. Ethan's grip on Jack's jacket tightened slightly. His small hand curled into the fabric. Jack laid one rough hand gently over the boy's without pulling it away, letting him feel the steady weight there. It wasn't much, but it was enough to show where his trust lay. The younger officer finally nodded, lowering his flashlight beam to the ground. "All right, we'll sort this out." Dispatch already confirmed a missing child report. His voice was calmer now, but Jack barely heard it. His focus remained on the boy clinging to him, the first fragile thread of trust woven in the dark. The radios on the officer's shoulders crackled to life, the dispatcher's voice carrying through the static. Both men lifted their heads, listening, and Jack caught only fragments at first. "Juvenile male, 9 years old, missing since late afternoon." The taller officer pressed a button, murmured something into his mic, then glanced at Jack with a shift in his expression. It wasn't suspicion now, but confirmation, as if the final piece of a puzzle had clicked into place. "Name's Ethan," the officer said, his tone more even than before. Report came in from his mother a few hours back. Said she lost track of him at a rest stop near exit 247. She's been calling it in every half hour since. They've had units combing the area. Jack's eyes went to the boy. Ethan hadn't looked up once, hadn't given him so much as a glance. His grip on Jack's jacket remained, small fingers curled tight into the fabric, as if the thread of trust he had found couldn't be risked on anyone else. Jack felt the weight of it. This boy wasn't just lost. He was tethered to something fragile, something more complicated than a simple case of wandering off. The younger officer stepped aside, speaking into his mic. "Copy, dispatch. Subject located safe, mile marker 254, eastbound shoulder. Request instructions." Static answered him first, then the dispatcher again, clearer this time. "Mother en route. She's been advised. ETA 20 minutes with state patrol escort. Keep the child safe and stable until she arrives." The boy flinched at the sudden burst of radio chatter, his humming growing louder again, his rocking quickening as if the noise had cut too close. Jack crouched slightly, lowering his voice. "It's all right, Ethan. They're just talking. Nothing's gonna hurt you." The boy didn't answer, but his grip on Jack's jacket didn't loosen. Jack's thoughts churned as he absorbed the information. Hours. The boy had been missing for hours before he found him standing alone against the cold. He pictured the mother's frantic calls, the fear that must have been clawing at her with each passing minute. But something about it gnawed at him. He looked at Ethan, at the worn backpack, the folded paper scrawled with numbers, the way he had whispered Mom like a prayer. If she had been searching desperately, how had he ended up miles from where he was last seen? The distance didn't add up. The taller officer knelt down, trying once more to bridge the gap. "Ethan," he said gently, but his voice still carried the clipped rhythm of command. "We're going to get you back to your mom. She's been worried sick." He paused, waiting for recognition. Ethan only pressed closer to Jack, his body angled slightly toward him, the blanket clutched like armor. Jack spoke instead, softer. "You hear that? They found your mom. She's coming to see you." The boy's rocking slowed for half a breath, but he didn't look up, didn't release his grip. The word had meaning to him, but whether it brought comfort or fear, Jack couldn't yet tell. The officers exchanged another glance. To them, this was a resolution. A missing child located, a mother on her way. But for Jack, it felt unfinished, a knot that hadn't been untangled. He had seen enough in the boy's silence, enough in a way he recoiled from noise and clung to a stranger's jacket, to know that when the woman arrived, answers might not come so neatly. He adjusted his stance, squaring his shoulders against the cold wind. 20 minutes, he thought. 20 minutes until a mother appeared with her story. 20 minutes to decide whether the word mom that Ethan whispered was a plea for comfort or something else entirely. The patrol cars idled quietly now, their beams sweeping across the road in long, steady arcs. The officers lingered near the vehicles, speaking low into their radios, while Jack stayed with Ethan. The boy had not moved far, still rooted to the shoulder, rocking gently, his hand gripping the hem of Jack's jacket as though it were the only solid thing left to him. Jack kept still, letting the small weight tug at his coat, not daring to break the thread of trust they had built. The younger officer returned first, his breath rising in pale clouds as he approached. "Mother says she last saw him at a rest stop, exit 247, he explained, glancing down at his notepad. Said he wandered while she was paying at the register. When she looked up, he was gone. She thought he'd ducked out to the car, but when she checked, he wasn't there. Jack frowned, rubbing a hand across his chin. Exit 247? That's near on 7 miles back. Closer to 8, the officer corrected. Dispatch logged a report around 6:30. That means he's been unaccounted for at least 4 hours. He lowered his notepad, his expression unreadable. Maybe he walked. Jack let out a low breath, scanning the boy's thin frame. Ethan's shoes were scuffed, yes, but not mud-streaked. Not worn the way they'd be if he'd trudged nearly 8 miles of shoulder in the dark. His legs were wiry, his body small. The thought of him covering that kind of distance, alone, without collapsing under cold, made Jack's jaw tighten. He didn't walk here, Jack muttered, shaking his head. Not this far. Not in this weather. Someone brought him. The taller officer rejoined them, having caught the last of Jack's words. His face was drawn tight, his skepticism not entirely erased. Are you saying his mother lied on the report? I'm saying something doesn't add up, Jack replied. His tone wasn't defiant, but firm, the voice of a man who'd spent too many nights piecing together the truth behind the things he saw on the road. He looked down at Ethan, at the boy's pale fingers clutching his jacket. Kids don't just vanish at a rest stop and reappear miles away without help. Not kids like him. The taller officer scribbled something into his own pad, his brows furrowed. It's possible he wandered longer than she realized. Parents lose track of time when they're panicked. Jack's eyes narrowed, or she didn't want to say what really happened. The silence that followed was heavy. Only the hum of the trucks passing filled it. A reminder that the world outside their small circle moved on without pause. Ethan's rocking grew faster at the sound of Ray's voices, his hum growing louder in response. Jack crouched again, softening his tone as he spoke to the boy, murmuring, "Easy now. It's all right." He glanced up at the officers. "Keep it down, you're scaring him." They quieted, though reluctantly, their gazes trading unspoken questions. Jack focused on Ethan, smoothing the edge of the blanket back over his shoulders. The boy's lips moved again, soundless this time, but Jack knew the word he was shaping. The same one he had whispered before. Mom. A word that should have meant safety, but now only deepened a knot of unease twisting in Jack's gut. The mother was on her way. Desperate, they'd said. But if she was desperate, why did her story stretch so thin? Jack had learned to trust his instincts on the road. When cargo didn't weigh what it should, when a driver's eyes didn't match his words, when something about a scene rang false. His instincts told him this wasn't a simple case of a boy wandering off. He stood again, squaring his shoulders against the cold. Soon enough, the truth would pull up in the form of a woman's car. And when it did, Jack knew he'd be watching every word, every glance, every tremor in her voice. Because something had put Ethan here, miles from where he belonged, and Jack wasn't ready to believe it was just chance. The night pressed colder with each passing minute, the kind of chill that sank into bone and lingered. Jack could see the boy's shivers through the blanket, faint tremors that rippled down his arms and into his hands. The officers lingered near their patrol cars, voices carrying low over radios, waiting for Mother who was still miles away. Jack crouched again, meeting Ethan's downcast face, and spoke in a voice that barely rose above a whisper. "Too cold out here, buddy. Want to sit in the truck? Just for a bit. It's warm inside." Ethan didn't answer, but his rocking slowed, the humming thinning into silence. His grip on Jack's jacket held, small fingers curling tighter, as if unsure whether letting go would mean losing the only safe thing left him. Jack eased a hand toward the boy's shoulder, careful not to touch, just motioning toward the open cab door, where the amber glow of the dashboard light spilled into the night. "Come on, just up there. No one's going to bother you." The boy hesitated, his gaze flicking briefly toward the truck. Jack caught it, the faint spark of curiosity, almost hidden under the weight of fear. That was enough. He stood and took a step toward the cab, pausing so the boy could decide. For a long moment, Ethan stayed where he was, rocking once, twice, before taking a small step forward, blanket trailing behind him. Jack kept his movement slow, climbing the first step of the rig before extending his arm behind him, giving Ethan the choice to follow. The boy's shoes scraped against the metal rung as he climbed, his motion stiff, uncertain. Jack guided him gently, not rushing, until at last Ethan slipped into the passenger seat. The cab's heater hummed low, washing the chill from the air, and the glow of the dashboard painted the space in muted greens and oranges. Ethan sat stiff at first, his backpack hugged tightly against his chest, eyes darting from corner to corner, as if memorizing every detail. Jack slid into the driver's seat, closing the door softly behind them. For a moment, the cab was filled only with the hum of the engine and the faint whistle of wind pressing against the windows. Then Ethan's fingers reached forward, tentatively at first, brushing the smooth plastic of the dashboard. He traced along the curve of the vent, the edge of the glove box, the seam of the radio dial. His lips moved, whispering something too faint to catch. Jack leaned, slightly listening. The boy's voice rose again, just enough to be heard this time. "Red," he murmured, fingertips brushing over a glowing switch. "Green." His hand moved to the numbers on the radio dial. "Blue." His voice was soft, fragile, but filled with a strange certainty, as though naming the colors anchored him to the world. Jack's throat tightened, though he kept his expression steady. "That's right," he said gently. "Those are the lights. Red, green, blue." Ethan's rocking had slowed now, replaced by the careful tracing of shapes and colors across the cab. His breathing evened out, the hum that had filled the night shifting into quiet whispers of recognition, each word soft but deliberate. For the first time since Jack had found him, the boy looked less like he was bracing against the world, and more like he was discovering a corner of it that belonged to him. Jack leaned back, one hand resting on the wheel, and let the silence stretch. It wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was softer, filled with the sound of child whispering colors, the heater's hum, and the steady presence of a man who knew he wasn't going anywhere. Jack glanced once toward the patrol cars outside, their headlights cutting across the highway. Let them wait, he thought. The boy was safe here, if only for this moment. And for Jack, that was more important than anything else. The heater's hum filled the cab with a steady warmth, the kind that wrapped around the space like a blanket. Jack sat in the driver's seat, his eyes drifting toward the boy now settled beside him. Ethan's body had relaxed only slightly, but it was enough to notice, his rocking gentler, his humming quiet, almost like a tune buried under his breath. His hands, no longer clenched into fists, searched inside the worn backpack, resting on his lap. Jack watched carefully, not intruding, just giving him room to move. Out came the broken crayons, each one chipped and peeled down to stubs. Ethan spread them on his knees, arranging them in a neat row, whispering their colors as he lined them up. Red, blue, yellow. His voice was soft, but the certainty in it cut through the quiet. Jack nodded slightly, saying nothing, allowing the boy to own the moment. Then Ethan dug deeper and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, blank on one side. He smoothed it across his thigh, the crayon tips rolling against the dashboard with small thuds. He began to draw, not random scrawls, not the aimless loops of a restless child, but deliberate lines, pressed hard enough that the paper bent under the force. Jack leaned subtly, watching the shapes take form. A square first, then a triangle perched above it. A house, simple and unmistakable. Next came a rectangle with wheels, a car positioned at the edge of the house. Ethan paused, his fingers fumbling through the crayons until he found black. With it, he dragged a long, straight line across the page, stretching from one side to the other. It was a road. Jack felt a chill trace his spine, not from the cold outside, but from the weight of what the boy was showing him. Ethan's lips moved again, whispers tumbling out. Housecar Road. The words were fractured, nearly swallowed, but they were words all the same. His small hand gripped a green crayon next, sketching two stick figures standing beside the house. Their heads were round, their arms simple lines stretching outward. For a moment, Jack saw only the innocence of a child's drawing. Then Ethan reached for the black crayon again. Carefully, slowly, he drew a thick X over one of the stick figures. He pressed so hard the crayon snapped in his hand, leaving a jagged mark across the page. His breath hitched, but he didn't stop rocking, didn't stop whispering. He set the broken piece aside and gripped the other half, dragging the crayon over the figure again until the shape beneath was nearly erased by the darkness. Jack's chest tightened as he stared at the image. The boy wasn't just drawing for the sake of it. He was telling something, showing something he couldn't or wouldn't say aloud. Jack thought of the word Ethan had whispered earlier, the only word he had spoken, Mom. He looked at the drawing again, at the crossed-out figure, his gut twisted with unease. Ethan whispered under his breath, the word repeating with each rock of his body. Mom. His fingers traced the house again, then the car, then the long line of the road. He jabbed the crayon down once more, circling the car until the paper threatened to tear. Jack steadied his breath, trying not to let the weight of what he was seeing show on his face. Okay, buddy, he said gently, his voice quiet but firm. I see it. I hear you. He didn't fully understand yet, but he knew enough. This wasn't random. The boy's silence was breaking apart, spilling into shapes and lines that carried a truth heavier than words. Jack folded the moment carefully into his chest, the drawing imprinting itself into his mind. Outside, the officers continued their quiet vigil, unaware of the story being etched in broken crayon strokes inside the truck. For Jack, though, the picture had already changed everything. It was no longer just a boy on a highway. It was a boy carrying a story that someone hadn't wanted told. The radio on the patrol car crackled again, sharper this time, cutting to the low murmur of engines and the distant rush of traffic. One of the officers lifted his mic, spoke briefly, then turned toward Jack's rig. He gestured, signaling that someone on the other end wanted to speak. Jack slid down from the cab, leaving Ethan rocking gently with his blanket and crayons, and crossed a short stretch of gravel to where the taller officer held the radio out toward him. Mother's on the line, the officer said. His tone was measured neutral, but his eyes studied Jack as though gauging how much weight he would carry in this exchange. Jack took the handset, its plastic cool against his palm. A breath of static, and then a woman's voice came through, fragile, uneven, the sound of someone fraying at the edges. Hello? Is he? Please, is he all right? Did you find him? Jack hesitated a fraction before answering, watching Ethan through the open cab door. He's here, he said, his voice steady. He's safe. A little cold, a little quiet, but safe. I've got him wrapped up in a blanket. The sound on the other end cracked into what might have been a sob. Oh, thank God. I thought I'd lost him forever. Her words tumbled fast, but underneath them Jack caught something else, a quiver that didn't come only from relief. There was a hesitation, a pause too long before certain phrases, as if she were measuring her story before speaking aloud. I turned my back for just a moment, she continued, her voice trembling. We stopped at the rest area. I went in to pay for gas, and when I came out he was gone. I searched everywhere. Everywhere. I called his name until my throat gave out. Nobody saw him. Nobody. Her voice broke again, replaced by silence and a shaky breath. Jack narrowed his eyes, scanning the road as though the dark itself might answer the questions forming in his mind. Ma'am, he said carefully, he's almost 8 miles from that rest stop. You sure that's where he went missing? The pause that followed was heavy. Yes, she said finally, but the word landed flat, unconvincing. Yes, it was a rest stop. He must have walked. He sometimes wanders. He doesn't always understand when he's gone too far. He just keeps going. Jack's jaw tightened. He looked again at Ethan, who was tracing circles on the dashboard with a blue crayon, whispering colors under his breath. A child like that, thin as a reed, shivering in the cold, walking 8 miles down a highway without being seen? The image didn't sit right. The boy's shoes weren't worn with the dirt of that distance. His body didn't sag with the exhaustion such a trek would have carved into him. And then there was the drawing. House, car, road, and the crossed-out figure. The woman's voice trembled again, cutting through his thoughts. Please, tell him I'm coming. Tell him his mother is on her way. Jack swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on the boy who still hadn't spoken more than that single word. I'll tell him, he said at last. His tone carried no judgment, only a weight she wouldn't recognize but that pressed heavily on him. Please, thank you, she whispered. And then the line went quiet, the static rushing in until the officer reached forward and clipped the mic back to his shoulder. Jack stood there for a long moment, staring at the gravel under his boots. He had heard desperation, yes, but woven into it was something else. Hesitation, maybe guilt, maybe fear. Whatever it was, it rang wrong. He turned back toward the truck, his steps slow, his eyes drawn once more to the boy who had clung to him instead of answering to anyone else. Whatever waited in the next 20 minutes when that mother arrived, Jack knew this wasn't going to be the clean reunion the officers were expecting. The cab of the truck was quiet again, save for the faint scratching of crayon on paper and the low hum of the engine. Jack sat in the driver's seat, his arms folded across his chest, his eyes fixed on the boy beside him. Ethan was absorbed in his own world, drawing shapes that seemed to carry meaning only he understood. The house, the road, the crossed-out figure, all of it burned into Jack's mind. He couldn't shake the image. The dispatcher's call with the mother lingered in his ears. Her story was neat enough on the surface. A child wanders from a rest stop. A frantic parent reports him missing. But Jack had spent too many years on the road to accept neat stories without looking at the details. He leaned back against the seat, eyes narrowing, as the cracks began to spread across the picture she had painted. 8 miles. That was the first problem. A boy Ethan's size, in thin shoes and a thinner jacket, wouldn't have made it 8 miles down a highway shoulder in near freezing cold without collapsing or being spotted. He wasn't scratched up, not limping, not caked in dirt or dust. Jack had walked enough ditches and service roads to know what the elements did to a man's body after even half that distance. The math didn't fit. Then there was a blanket of silence Ethan had wrapped himself in, broken only by the hums and that one word, Mom. It wasn't the way a child lost by accident would cry. There were no shouts, no desperate pleas, no tears staining his cheeks. Instead, there was a guarded stillness, a rocking rhythm that seemed rehearsed, as if he had learned to keep himself calm when the world around him spun out of control. Jack had seen that kind of silence before, and it didn't come from a child who simply wandered too far. His gaze drifted to the backpack at the boy's feet, worn to threads, filled with odds and ends, a dented water bottle, stubby crayons, a folded paper scrawl with numbers. Not the kind of bag hastily grabbed during a frantic escape, but something packed and carried with regularity. A bag that looked like it lived on his shoulders more often than not. That, too, gnawed at Jack. He thought of the mother's voice on the radio, the way she had faltered when he pressed her about the distance. The desperation had sounded real enough, but underneath it was a hesitation, a crack in her words. She had said he must have walked. Jack's gut told him otherwise. If he hadn't walked here, then someone had brought him. And if someone had brought him, then why had they left him standing in the dark on the side of the highway? The boy shifted beside him, whispering softly as he drew another car on the paper, circling it again and again until the lines blurred into black smudges. Jack's chest tightened as he watched. Whatever the child was trying to tell him, it wasn't the story the officers were expecting to write in their reports. This wasn't a case of a careless moment at a rest stop. This was something heavier, something darker, hovering just out of reach but close enough to feel. Jack let out a long breath and glanced at the patrol cars idling outside. The officers would take the mother's account at face value. They would write it up, close the case, and move on. But Jack knew he couldn't. Not after the way Ethan's hand had clung to his jacket. Not after the way his voice had broken only to say Mom. Not after the drawing with its blackened figure. Too much didn't add up, and Jack's instincts, honed from years on the road and a lifetime of reading people, told him to stay wary. The boy rocked quietly, lost again in his rhythm, but Jack's mind was racing. There was a shadow behind the story, and he was certain of one thing. Ethan wasn't just lost. Someone had left him here, and until the truth surfaced, Jack wasn't about to let the boy face it alone. The officers huddled by their cars, their voices carrying low but firm through the cold night air. Jack caught fragments of it. Protocols, paperwork, the word transfer repeated more than once. He knew what they were circling around before the taller one finally stepped forward, his breath rising in the chill, his flashlight beam lowered to the gravel. "Sir," he began, his tone clipped but not unkind, "we got to think about the boy's welfare tonight. Standard procedure says we'll take him into protective custody until his mother arrives. He'll be transferred to social services for the night, if needed." The words had barely left his mouth when Ethan reacted. It was as though the suggestion itself pierced whatever fragile calm had settled in the cab. His humming broke into jagged bursts, louder, almost frantic. His rocking grew violent. his small body jerking forward and back with such force that the crayon scattered off his lap and clattered onto floor mats. He shoved his hands hard against his ears, muffling the sound of voices, his eyes wide, staring at the door as though someone might drag him out at any second. Jack was on him in an instant, crouching beside the passenger seat, his hand hovering but careful not to grab. "Easy, son. Easy," he said, his voice steady, cutting to the chaos like a low hum of its own. "Nobody's taking you anywhere you don't want to go. You're safe here. Right here." The boy's breathing came in sharp bursts, his chest rising and falling too quickly. He rocked harder, whispering words too broken to catch, fragments of no buried in his hum. Jack leaned closer, lowering his tone until it was just above a whisper. "Look at me, Ethan. You're not alone. I've got you." For a moment, the boy's eyes flickered up. Not fully, not steady, but enough. His trembling slowed just slightly, the blanket slipping from his shoulders as he curled into himself. Jack reached out then, laying his rough hand gently over Ethan's small fingers where they clutched at the fabric of his jacket. The boy didn't pull away. Instead, he gripped tighter, his hand tiny against the coarse weave of Jack's coat. Jack turned his head toward the officers, his jaw set. "He stays with me until she gets here," he said flatly. "You haul him off to some holding office with strangers. You'll undo every bit of calm we've managed tonight. Look at him. Does he look like he can handle that?" The younger officer hesitated, his eyes shifting from Jack to the boy, clearly uncertain. The taller one frowned, his lips pressing into a thin line. "Mr. Morrison, we can't." "Yes, you can," Jack cut in, his voice firm. "You've got discretion. Use it. I'll vouch for him. I'm not leaving until she gets here. You want paperwork, you can write that down." The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by Ethan's soft rocking and the low rumble of the truck's engine. Finally, the younger officer spoke, his tone subdued. "He does seem calmer with you." Jack softened his grip on Ethan's hand, keeping his voice gentle but steady. "That's because he knows I'm not letting go." The taller officer exhaled, clearly displeased but unwilling to escalate. He gave a curt nod. "Fine, but she gets here within the hour. If she doesn't, we reevaluate." "Fair enough," Jack said. His eyes stayed on the boy, whose rocking had slowed now, the panic ebbing back into a fragile hum. He was still clutching Jack's jacket, refusing to release that one anchor he trusted. Jack adjusted the blanket around his shoulders again, pulling it tighter this time. "You hear that, buddy? You're not going anywhere. Just sit tight. I'll stay right here with you." The officers returned to their cars, radios murmuring once again. Jack remained in the cab, his presence steady, his voice a calm murmur in the boy's storm. Whatever the rules said, he knew in his gut this child needed something more than procedure tonight. He needed someone who wouldn't walk away. The convoy of lights along the interstate gave way to the softer glow of a truck stop, its lamps rising tall and pale against the black sky. The officers had radioed ahead, making it clear this was the safest place to wait out the night until Ethan's mother arrived. Jack pulled his rig into a space near the back of the lot, away from the rumble of idling semis, but close enough to the glow of the lamps that the shadows couldn't reach them. The patrol cars lingered nearby, their presence steady but distant, leaving Jack with the boy who had attached himself silently to his side. Ethan had calm enough to follow when Jack guided him from the passenger seat into the sleeper cab at the back of the truck. The heater filled the small space with warmth, wrapping around them in a way the cold roadside never could. Jack spread the blanket across the narrow bed, then crouched low as Ethan climbed in. The boy didn't ask questions, didn't even glance toward him. He simply curled his thin frame into the corner, pulling the fabric up around his shoulders as though it were a shell he could vanish inside. His backpack rested against his chest, clutched tight, as if he feared it might be taken if he let it go. Jack lingered there, adjusting the blanket so it covered him fully. He tucked one edge lightly under the boy's chin, careful not to startle him. Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on the floor of the cab, blinking slowly, heavy with exhaustion. The day's weight was pressing down now, stronger than fear, stronger than the cold. His rocking slowed, then ceased altogether. Within minutes, his breathing even into the shallow rhythm of sleep, the crayon still clutched loosely in his hand. Jack settled into the seat across from him, his back against the wall, eyes never straying far. He didn't feel the tug of sleep himself. Instead, he kept watch, scanning the truck stop outside through the narrow window. The neon sign flickered faintly in the distance, advertising fuel and coffee, its glow reflecting off the wet asphalt. Every now and then, another rig rolled in, its brakes sighing as it settled, drivers shuffling into the diner or slumping over their wheels for a few hours' rest. But inside Jack's cab, the world was still, as if it closed itself around the boy's fragile sleep. Jack rubbed at his eyes, feeling the fatigue of the day settle into his bones. But he didn't move. His thoughts circled back to the inconsistencies, the questions left unanswered. He thought of Ethan's drawing, the house, the car, the long road, and the figure crossed out in thick black lines. He thought of the mother's faltering voice on the radio, the hesitation she hadn't quite hidden. And he thought of Ethan's single whispered word, "Mom," fragile as a thread. He glanced at the boy again, curled small under the blanket. Jack knew the officers outside considered this a resolution, a waiting game until a woman arrived to claim her son. But in his gut, Jack felt something else. This wasn't just about reuniting a child with a parent. This was about what the boy had endured to end up on that highway, silent, shivering, and alone. That wasn't solved by paperwork. That was only beginning. The clock on the dashboard ticked quietly, its green digits shifting toward midnight. Jack adjusted his position, folding his arms across his chest. His eyes stayed open, fixed on the boy as though his presence alone could keep danger at bay. The night stretched long around them, but Jack made no move to close his eyes. Ethan had someone watching him now, someone who wasn't going to leave him standing in the dark. The hours stretched long inside the cab, the hum of the heater, the only constant against the quiet night. Outside, the truck stop settled into a rhythm of its own, engines idling, doors opening and shutting, footsteps crunching on gravel. But within the narrow sleeper, it felt as if the world had shrunk to the space Jack shared with the boy. Ethan lay curled beneath the blanket, his backpack pressed to his chest, his small frame shifting now and then in restless sleep. Jack sat across from him, his back against the wall, eyes heavy but refusing to close. He knew better than to trust the quiet. Children carried storms even in their dreams. It came first as a murmur, soft and almost lost under the word events. Jack leaned forward slightly, straining to hear. Ethan's lips moved, the words breaking free in a whisper so faint it might have been mistaken for breath. "Car door." His voice trailed, fading into silence, but the phrase lodged itself in Jack's chest. He waited, patient, listening as the boy shifted again. Minutes passed before the next words came, jagged and uneven, like pieces of a puzzle scattered across the floor. "Loud," Ethan whispered, his tone trembling, his eyelids fluttering but never fully opening. The sound carried something raw, as though the memory itself was still sharp in his mind. Jack's jaw tightened. He had heard the way children relived things they couldn't explain, how their bodies told truths long before their mouths could. Ethan turned slightly under the blanket, his fingers clutching at the fabric. Another fragment slipped free. "Left." The word hung in the air, simple, incomplete, but heavy. Jack leaned back slowly, the pieces arranging themselves in his thoughts whether he wanted them to or not. A car door slamming, loud enough to echo. Someone leaving. Someone walking away and not coming back. He let out a slow breath, rubbing his rough hands over his knees. These weren't just dreams. They were glimpses, the scattered remnants of a story Ethan couldn't bring himself to tell. Jack had seen enough in his life to recognize when silence held meaning. The boy hadn't wandered miles down a highway on his own. He had been brought there, left there, and the memory of that moment clung to him even in sleep. Ethan stirred again, his hum returning, softer this time, as if the sound was a shield against the fragments breaking loose. Jack reached over, adjusting the blanket, so it stayed tucked around his shoulders. "You're all right, kiddo," he murmured, though he knew the boy couldn't hear him fully. "Nobody's leaving you now." For a long time, Jack sat still, the boy's whispers replaying in his mind like broken pieces of a tape. Car door. Loud. Left. The officers outside would write their reports, follow procedure, check boxes. But Jack knew what he had heard wasn't paperwork. It was testimony. Fragile, incomplete, but damning all the same. The night wore on, the clock ticking steadily on the dashboard. Jack didn't sleep. He kept his eyes on the boy, his mind piecing together the fragments into a story he was beginning to understand too well. This wasn't just a child lost on the side of the road. This was a child left there. The first edge of dawn had not yet touched the horizon, but Jack was already behind the wheel, his rig humming low as he idled in the corner of the truck stop lot. The patrol cars remained nearby, their headlights dim now, waiting for the mother who was said to be on her way. Inside the cab, Ethan still slept curled in the sleeper, the blanket cocoon around his frame, his breathing shallow but steady. Jack sat in the driver's seat, one hand gripping the wheel, so tightly his knuckles showed white beneath the skin. His jaw was locked, his gaze fixed forward, but his mind burned with the fragments of the night. Car door. Loud. Left. The words had replayed again and again until they felt carved into him. He knew the rhythm of abandonment when he heard it. Too many miles on the road had shown him children who carried those scars, each one left behind by the very people who should have been their shelter. He had seen them at rest stops, at gas stations, standing in parking lots with eyes that searched for someone who never came back. It was a pattern, and once you recognized it, you couldn't unsee it. His hand tightened further on the wheel. A child wasn't supposed to whisper words like those in the middle of the night. A child wasn't supposed to rock himself into calm on the side of an interstate, or cling to the jacket of a stranger because no one else had proved safe. The thought of it, of someone turning their back and walking away from a boy like Ethan, stirred something heavy and unyielding inside him. Anger, sharp and deep, mixed with sorrow he couldn't shake. He thought his own son, grown now, but once just as small. He thought of the long nights he had spent away on the road, the phone calls he had made to reassure his family. He was still there. He hadn't been perfect. He knew the ache of absence all too well, but he had never walked away, never left his boy in the cold. The idea of doing so was unthinkable, a betrayal of the most sacred role a parent could carry. Jack exhaled sharply, the breath fogging the cab's window before fading. He looked into the rear-view mirror, catching a glimpse of the boy's small frame in the sleeper. Ethan stirred slightly, a hand twitching against the blanket, but he didn't wake. Jack's grip on the wheel eased only enough to flex his fingers, then tightened again. He wasn't angry at Ethan's mother specifically, not yet, but at the possibility, the gnawing suspicion that she had left him on purpose. That suspicion burned hotter with every minute that passed. The officers would see procedure, would check boxes, and if the mother arrived in tears, they would hand the boy back over without question. But Jack couldn't let go of the fragments Ethan had given him, the picture drawn in whispers and crayon lines. He clenched the wheel again, the leather creaking under the strain. He had hauled freight across the country for decades, but this was the heaviest load he had ever carried. A child left alone, a child abandoned. It wasn't just wrong, it was unforgivable. And if no one else was going to protect him, then Jack knew deep in his chest that he would. The horizon bled into pale gray as dawn pressed its first light across the truck stop. The lamps that had glowed to the night flickered and dimmed, their halos fading into the morning haze. Jack sat upright in the driver's seat, stiff from hours without sleep, his eyes sharp despite the fatigue that gnawed at him. In the sleeper, Ethan shifted under the blanket, stirring but not fully waking. The faint hum of his breath, the only sound besides the idle rumble of the rig. The crunch of tires on gravel broke the fragile quiet. A car pulled into the lot, slowing as it approached the cluster of patrol vehicles. The officers straightened, their posture alert but not tense, as though the end they had been waiting for had finally arrived. Jack leaned forward, narrowing his eyes through the windshield. The sedan that rolled to a stop was older, its paint dulled, one hubcap missing. The engine coughed as it died, leaving silence in its place. A woman climbed out. Her hair was unkempt, pulled into a loose knot that had long since given up. Her clothes hung awkwardly wrinkled, as if they'd been pulled on in haste and worn through a sleepless night. She carried herself like someone whose body bore the weight of too many burdens at once. Her hands trembled as she slammed the door shut, then smoothed across her face, trying to hold herself together as she approached the officers. "I'm his mother," she said quickly, her voice breaking with urgency. "Where is he? Please, I need to see him." Her words tumbled fast, frantic, But Jack's ears were tuned to more than tone. He listened to the pauses between them, the cracks that spread like fractures in stone. She sounded desperate. But beneath the surface there was something else. Hesitation, calculation, as though she was deciding which parts of the story to tell. The taller officer nodded toward the rig. He's safe. A driver found him last night. Pulled over when he spotted him on the shoulder. Kid's been with him since. He tilted his head toward Jack. Morrison here kept him warm. Probably saved him from hypothermia. The woman's eyes darted to the truck, wide with something Jack struggled to read. Relief, yes, but was that all? She pressed a hand against her chest. Thank you, she whispered, voice shaking. Thank you for stopping. Jack opened the cab door, stepping down slowly. He didn't speak right away, just studied her with the steady gaze of a man who had learned to read people on long roads and in quiet diners. She looked worn, yes, but there was more than exhaustion in her eyes. There was fear, not just a fear of losing a child, but the fear of being seen too clearly. Behind him, Ethan stirred, blinking against the pale morning light. His small head rose above the edge of the blanket. For a moment he was still, frozen as his gaze fixed on the woman outside. Then he began to rock again, faster, clutching his backpack to his chest. His lips moved, whispering words Jack had already heard in the dark. Car door loud left. The mother reached toward him instinctively, but Jack stepped slightly in front of the cab's door, his hand resting on the frame. He's been through a lot tonight, he said evenly. You might want to go slow. She swallowed, nodding quickly. Of course. He doesn't always understand. Sometimes he just wanders, and when I turned around, he was gone. I searched everywhere. I called everyone. I thought. She stopped, her voice cracking. Jack studied her carefully. The words were rehearsed enough to be smooth, but the edges didn't match. Wandered, gone, searched everywhere. And yet Ethan's fragments told another story, one he had whispered in the dark like confession. Car door, loud, left. The picture that formed in Jack's mind wasn't of a boy who drifted unnoticed. It was of a boy who was placed somewhere and abandoned. He didn't call her on it. Not yet. Instead, he nodded once, though his eyes never softened. He's alive. He's safe. That's what matters now. But in his chest, the anger stirred again, hotter now, tempered only by the boy's hand that clung to his jacket through the night. Ethan's story was incomplete, but Jack had heard enough to know one thing. The woman standing before him didn't match the truth in the child's whispers, and that truth would not be ignored. The morning light had strengthened by the time Ethan's mother stood in front of the rig, her eyes darting between the boy and the officers. Jack could feel the tension wrapping itself around the moment, thick as a chain. The officers were waiting for him to open the cab door, to let the boy climb down and into her arms, but Jack didn't move. His boots were planted firmly on the gravel, his body angled just enough to shield the boy behind him. Ethan hadn't made a sound since she arrived, not even a soft hum. He was motionless, eyes fixed on the dashboard, as if the world outside the cab was too sharp to face. Jack folded his arms across his chest, his voice even but solid. Before anyone takes this boy anywhere, I need answers. The taller officer frowned. Mr. Morrison, it's not really your place to... The hell it isn't, Jack cut in, his tone low but firm. I found him standing on a highway in the dark. I wrapped him in my blanket. I kept him safe when no one else did. He trusted me when he wouldn't look at another soul. You think I'm going to hand him over without knowing how he ended up there? Not a chance. The mother shifted uncomfortably, her hands twisting together. I told you. I turn around for a second. He wanders. He doesn't know how dangerous it is. He just goes. Her voice cracked at the edges, but Jack's eyes narrowed. He'd heard people spin stories too many times. Drivers at way stations, strangers at diners, people who thought their words had covered the truth. It was always the small inconsistencies that gave them away. 8 miles, Jack said, his voice hardening. That's how far he was from where you say you lost him. You telling me he walked that alone? In this cold? Without collapsing? Without someone seeing him? Without a scratch on him? You expect me to believe that? The officers exchanged uneasy glances, the younger one shifting his weight. The mother's face drained of color. "You don't understand," she stammered. He's different. He doesn't think like other kids. He just keeps going, and you can't stop him once he starts." Jack's jaw tightened, but before he could press further, the taller officer stepped in, his voice clipped. "That's enough. Mr. Morrison, step back. This is for us to handle now." Jack didn't move. He felt Ethan's ship behind him. The faintest tug on his jacket, a silent plea not to be left alone. Jack raised a hand slightly, signaling calm, but his eyes stayed locked on the officers. "Then handle it right. Don't just take her word and hand him back over. Look at him. Look at the state he's in. You think a kid ends up on the shoulder of a highway at night without something bigger at play? Document it. Every word. Every detail. Because if you don't, I will." That was when another vehicle pulled into the lot, a state social services van, white paint dull with years of service. A woman in a dark coat stepped out, clipboard in hand, her expression brisk but not unkind. She introduced herself quickly, then asked for the child's name. The officers gestured toward the truck, and Jack stepped aside only enough to let her approach, but not enough to remove himself from the boy's orbit. Ethan's hum returned at the sight of another stranger, louder this time, but Jack leaned back into the cab, his hand resting lightly on the blanket over the boy's shoulder. "It's all right. They're just here to write things down. I'm not going anywhere." The social worker scribbled notes, asked questions of the officers, then turned toward the mother. Each answer she gave was recorded, her hesitations noted. Jack watched the pen move quickly, relief threading into his frustration. Someone was at least paying attention, someone writing the pieces down instead of glossing over them. But when she turned to him, asking for his account, Jack spoke carefully, leaving nothing out. He told her about the silence, the rocking, the single word, "Mom," and the fragments whispered in the dark, "Car door loud left." He told her about the drawing, the crossed-out figure, the way Ethan had panicked at the idea of being taken anywhere, but it clung to him with a grip stronger than fear. He spoke like a man who knew every detail mattered, because it did. By the time he finished, the weight of it hung over the group. The social worker closed her clipboard slowly. "We'll need to review this fully," she said. Her eyes lingered on the boy, then on the mother, whose face had gone pale and tight. Jack stepped back finally, but only just. Ethan's hand was still clutching his sleeve, and as long as the boy held on, Jack wasn't about to let go. The morning air was sharp with cold, the kind that cut through coats and burned in the lungs. The truck stop lot had filled with a quiet tension, the patrol cars and the social services van forming a half-circle that framed the scene. The mother stood near the hood of her sedan, her arms wrapped tightly across her chest, her eyes fixed on the cab where Ethan still sat. She looked ready to step forward, ready to claim him with the urgency of someone who had spent the night in panic. But when Jack shifted aside and helped the boy down from the rig, the moment didn't unfold the way anyone expected. Ethan's feet touched the gravel, his shoes scuffing the ground as he steadied himself. He blinked against the brightness of the morning, his eyes darting quickly across the scene. The officers, the clipboard in the social worker's hands, the figure of his mother standing apart. For a moment, the blanket around his shoulders slipped, and Jack reached down, adjusting it back into place. The boy didn't flinch at the touch. Instead, his small hand rose and found Jack's, gripping it tight, his fingers curling around rough knuckles like they were the only anchor he trusted. The mother took a step forward, her voice breaking as she called, "Ethan." It was a single word, weighted with desperation, but the boy didn't move toward her. His hand only tightened around Jack's, his eyes wide, locked on the woman as if she were both familiar and foreign all at once. His lips parted, a sound forming, but it never left his throat. Instead, he leaned slightly toward Jack, the silent plea in his gaze clear enough that no words were needed. Jack felt it in his chest like a blow. He had expected hesitation, maybe even fear, but not this, not the raw, unspoken choice a child should never have to make. He crouched low, bringing himself level with the boy. "It's all right, son," he said gently. "You don't have to let go until you're ready." The taller officer cleared his throat, his eyes darting between the boy and the mother. "He's been reported missing." he reminded, though the words sounded weaker now, less certain. She is his legal guardian. The social worker's pen hovered above her clipboard, her expression caught between procedure and instinct. She had seen enough children in enough impossible situations to recognize what was happening. Jack could see in her eyes. She didn't interrupt. She only watched, waiting, documenting. The mother stepped closer, her hands trembling. "Baby, please. Come here. It's over now. You're safe." Her voice cracked, but the boy only rocked once on his feet, then stilled, his grip on Jack unrelenting. Jack rose slowly, keeping his hand steady in Ethan's. His jaw tightened, his voice directed not at the boy but at the adults circling them. "You see this," he said quietly, the weight of it carrying farther than if he'd shouted. "He's telling you what words can't. He's not ready. Maybe he's not willing. Either way, you'd better listen." The silence that followed was thick, punctuated only by the rumble of a semi pulling out onto the highway. The boy didn't move toward his mother. He stayed rooted where he was, his hand inside Jack's, his wide eyes begging not to be forced. For Jack, the message was as clear as anything he had ever heard in all his years on the road. The boy's trust had already chosen, and it hadn't chosen the woman waiting by the car. The mood at the truck stop changed as the sun crept higher, the pale light revealing faces that had been half hidden in the dark. What had begun as a simple recovery, a missing child reunited with his mother, was unraveling into something heavier. The social worker's questions grew sharper, her pen moving faster across the clipboard as details emerged that didn't fit the surface story. The officers, who had once seemed content to follow routine, now stood with furrowed brows, their radios buzzing more frequently as information came in from dispatch. Jack stayed near the boy, his hand still held firmly in Ethan's smaller grip. He could feel the child's tension, the way every sound made him flinch, every glance toward the woman who claimed to be his mother tightening his hold. Jack said little, but he didn't need to. His presence was statement enough. The boy trusted him, and that trust carried weight in the eyes of those watching. The younger officer approached first, his voice quieter now, almost cautious. "We've got reports coming in from the local unit. Child Protective Services has been called before, multiple times." He glanced toward the mother, who stood pale and shaking near her sedan. Neighbors reported shouting, long absences. The boy left alone. Nothing stuck, no charges filed. But it's not the first time his name has come up. Jack felt his jaw clench, though he forced himself to remain still. He looked down at Ethan, who was tracing the seam of Jack's sleeve with his thumb, his gaze fixed anywhere but the scene unfolding around him. The fragments of the night returned to Jack like echoes. Car door loud left. A boy who hadn't wandered but had been left. It all pressed together into a picture that was no longer a guess but a truth. The social worker stepped closer, her voice carrying authority now. Given the inconsistencies in her statement and the boy's condition, protective custody is being initiated. He will not be released back into her care at this time. She looked directly at Jack, her expression measured. "You'll need to provide a full account of last night. Everything you witnessed." Jack nodded once. "You'll get it," he said, his tone firm. "Every detail." He thought of the drawing in crayon, the crossed-out figure, the whispered words in the dark. Those weren't random. They were testimony, fragile but real. He would carry them into his statement, even if the boy couldn't. The mother's voice rose suddenly, breaking the fragile calm. "You can't do this. He's my son. He belongs with me." Her face flushed with desperation, but there was a tremor beneath the anger, the kind Jack recognized. It wasn't just fear of losing him. It was fear of being found out. The taller officer stepped forward, holding up a hand. "Ma'am, you'll need to cooperate. This isn't up for debate." His voice carried no softness now, only the firmness of procedure turning against her. Jack felt Ethan shift closer to him, pressing against his side. He rested a steady hand on the boy's shoulder, his eyes on the woman, but his words directed to Ethan. "You're safe now. Nobody's taking you where you don't want to go." The boy didn't answer, but his grip remained tight, his silence louder than any cry. By the time another unit arrived to escort the mother for questioning, the case had shifted entirely. This wasn't about reunion anymore. It was about protection, about piecing together what the boy had endured and ensuring it wouldn't happen again. And in the middle of it stood Jack Morrison, truck driver, witness, and the one man the child trusted when everyone else's words failed. He hadn't asked for it, hadn't planned for it, but looking down at Ethan's hand in his, Jack knew he was already bound to the boy's story, and he wasn't about to step away. The days that followed felt long and strange to Jack, the rhythm of the road broken by the memory of the boy he had left in the hands of social services. He had carried loads across state lines, stopped at diners where the coffee tasted of burnt beans, and parked under neon lights that hummed in the dark. But no matter how far the miles stretched, his mind always circled back to the truck stop, to Ethan's hand clutching his jacket, to the fragile words whispered in the night. Car door, loud, left. Those fragments stayed with him like echoes on an empty highway. When the call came from the caseworker, Jack was parked at a rest area, staring absently at the horizon. She told him Ethan was in temporary care, safe but quiet, still withdrawn. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, he asked about the truck. That was enough to reroute his plans. By the next morning, he was pulling his rig into the gravel lot of the facility, its plain brick wall surrounded by a chain-link fence that tried and failed to look welcoming. Jack climbed down from the cab, adjusting his cap as he approached the entrance. The caseworker met him with a clipboard tucked under her arm, her expression tired but softer than it had been that first morning. He hasn't said much, she admitted, but when we told him you were coming, he sat by the window and wouldn't move. Inside, the halls were sterile, painted in muted colors that tried to hide the weight of their purpose. Jack's boots echoed as he walked, guided to a small common room where children's drawings covered the walls. Some were bright, full of houses and trees. Others carried a darker edge, scribbles that spoke of things words couldn't. At the far side of the room, perched on a chair too big for him, was Ethan. His blanket was draped over his shoulders, his backpack on the floor beside him. For a moment, the boy didn't move, just watched Jack with wide eyes. Then Jack lifted 2 fingers to his lips and gave a low, playful blast of the truck's air horn from memory. The sound wasn't real, but the gesture was clear enough. Ethan's lips twitched, uncertain at first, then curved into something small and fleeting but unmistakable. A smile, the first Jack had seen. Jack's chest tightened, his throat rough with emotion he didn't show. He crouched down in front of the boy, his voice steady. "There you are, buddy. Missed you." Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a stub of blue crayon, holding it between his fingers like it was a lifeline. He pressed into Jack's palm without a word, then pointed toward the window where the truck sat waiting in the lot. Jack glanced at the caseworker, who gave a faint nod. Together they walked outside, Ethan's small hand once again finding Jack's. The boy paused at the base of the steps of the cab, his eyes wide, his rocking returning faintly. Jack leaned down. "You remember?" he asked softly. Ethan nodded once, then whispered, almost too quiet to hear, "Truck." Jack smiled, helping him climb inside. Once seated, Ethan reached immediately for the dashboard, tracing the lines of the vents, the buttons, the glow of the gauges, just as he had that first night. His lips moved again, naming colors, red, green, yellow, and his rocking slowed, his breathing evening out. Jack sat in the driver's seat, watching him quietly. On the asphalt outside, the world moved on, engines idling, horns blaring, but inside the cab, something stronger had taken hold. Trust, a bond carved not from words, but from presence, from warmth, from the steady hum of a truck that had become a kind of refuge. Jack leaned back, one hand resting lightly on the wheel. He knew the road ahead for Ethan would be complicated, tangled with courts and reports and questions that had no easy answers. But for now, in the glow of the dashboard and the quiet sound of a boy whispering colors, Jack allowed himself a rare moment of peace. The bond had been forged on asphalt, sealed in the cold night of a highway, and nothing, not distance, not paperwork, not time, could undo it. The highway had always been a place of passing moments for Jack. Faces glimpsed in other vehicles, strangers at gas stations, voices over CB that faded with distance. People came and went, their stories brushing against us only briefly before vanishing into miles. But this time was different. This time, the road had handed him a child, and nothing about it had faded. He thought about that first night often. The boy standing alone on the shoulder as the wind clawed through his thin jacket, rocking against the noise of the world. The memory clung to him like exhaust on his clothes, something he couldn't shake even if he wanted to. Ethan had been just another figure at first, a flicker in the beam of headlights. But as the hours unfolded, he had become something else entirely. Proof that a life could shift in an instant, that a trucker's steady eye could mean the difference between being left behind and being pulled back into the world. Ethan's days in temporary care were not easy. There were questions from strangers, assessments, papers shuffled across desks. But for the first time, people were listening. His whispers were no longer lost in the noise. His drawings were no longer dismissed as scribbles. Each fragment, the house, the car, the crossed-out figure, the broken words in the dark, was treated like testimony, not background noise. Slowly, a picture was being pieced together, one that carried weight in the eyes of those who decided where a child should live and with whom. And through it all, Jack kept showing up. The road called him back to work, but he found ways to circle back, parking his rig in the lot and waiting for visiting hours. Every time, the boy's eyes lit at the sight of him, the hum of recognition spilling into the cab when Jack let him climb into the passenger seat. The sound of the air horn, the glow of the dashboard lights, those became signals of safety, little rituals that steadied the boy when the world still felt untrustworthy. For Jack, the bond stirred something he hadn't realized he'd been missing. His own son was grown, long gone into his own life, and Jack had accepted the quiet that came with being a man whose family no longer needed him the same way. But Ethan had reopened that part of him, the part that knew what it meant to guard someone fragile, to be the one constant when everything else was uncertain. It wasn't about replacing what he'd lost. It was about remembering that purpose didn't end when the road grew long. Sometimes it began again when you least expected it. The officers had seen it. The social worker had seen it. Even the case notes, neat lines of ink on paper, had begun to acknowledge it. The truck driver who had kept the boy warm, who had been the first to hear him, the first to understand that silence wasn't emptiness but a language all its own. Jack had become more than a witness. He was part of the story now, proof that sometimes the person who stopped wasn't just a passerby, but the answer a child had been waiting for. As spring settled over the highways, Jack found himself driving with a different kind of focus. He still hauled freight, still logged miles across state lines, but the purpose ran deeper. He wasn't just delivering cargo. He was carrying the weight of a promise, unspoken but real, that no one left behind should have to stand alone, that he would keep his eyes sharp for the ones the world overlooked. Ethan's life was no longer a story of being abandoned on asphalt. It was becoming a story of being found, of being seen, of being given a chance to grow in a world that might finally protect him. And for Jack, the lonely hours of the road no longer felt empty. They carried meaning now. Forged in the moment, he pulled his rig to the shoulder and refused to drive away. Everything had changed, not just for the boy who had whispered "Mom" into the night, but for the man who had answered that silence with presence. The road ahead was uncertain, but for both of them, it was no longer traveled alone.